We want to call to order the Strategic Planning Committee meeting of Monday, May 4th, 2015. We have, with that, we will have the invocation and the pledge. Dear Lord, we want to thank you for all the great things you've given us and the opportunity to live in Ascension Parish, all the great people we have here. Also, thank you so much for this wonderful weather you've given us this week. We'd like to ask that we continue this as we go on through this period of time. We want to thank you for everyone coming through these bad storms the past weekend without any significant injuries, and that way we may continue to clean up and move forward into a summer. We'd ask that you allow us to make good decisions tonight, and that everyone, as we finish, return home safely. We ask all this in your name. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, and everyone's here tonight. Public comment period number 3. Anyone wishing to speak on any agenda item, to do so, please sign a card, and you're allowed to come up and speak at that time period. And number 4, proposed modifications to the drainage regulations for subdivisions. This is something, the third meeting we've come up and trying to tweak the drainage regulations for subdivisions. At this time last year, we had adopted some changes in order to prevent what we call the anthills and things, and try to get some kind of a semblance of order on how high we're allowed to go, or what restrictions we're allowed to do on the elevations of the lots with developments. Since that time, we've had commercial developments that had certain criteria that they can basically mitigate from ground zero, and that homeowners have the first 3 feet that they can build on and build up without any restrictions, and then after that they have to mitigate with engineering and mitigate their water. And then subdivisions have come back, and they were not allowed to build at all after 3 feet, and they're the only ones that are not, so they came back to try to ask for modifications. And so as a compromise, it has been offered that subdivisions would be required to mitigate from ground zero on their water volume. So this is what you have in your packet is what has been talked about, discussed and discussed, and so this is pretty much what we have come to since the last meeting, and we've asked that everyone get your concerns out, and so that we can get a vote on this and move forward to the council. There's a number of things being proposed, and we need to do this one way or another. With that, we want to open the floor for Parish President. You have
Deferred to Bill.
a Bill. Bill, we're looking at modification, drainage regulations, and anything since it has been changed and things, any
Well, we received what but came from the committee that was put together by some of the engineering firms, and what we requested to be added to the drainage ordinance was added, and to our satisfaction. It really clarified the BFEs and exactly the point that this is for individuals and not for commercial developments or subdivisions, and that's some things that we requested. So with regards to the change of the language to the ordinance, again, we are okay with that. Now, it's just for clarification, the administration feels that purely from a drainage aspect, purely drainage, that any filling of below the BFE is detrimental to floodplain management. So the administration feels that any filling of below the BFE should be avoided and should be not part of the ordinance. However, if it is your recommendation to go with the 3-foot fill for individuals, what you have in the ordinance as amended by the task force that looked at it is okay with the parish.
But tonight, what we're addressing is the subdivision. Individual discussion for individuals, we can put that, we had a discussion about it, about putting it on the agenda for the next,
Okay.
for the next strategic planning to get started on that. Because there was some discussions about whether that's what we wanted. So we want to try to keep it on one thing.
Okay,
So
if you're talking
we're
purely
addressing
from
subdivisions, yeah.
subdivision and as amended, we agree with, we're okay with.
Benny?
I got some questions for you, Bill. So in here, it references stamped plans by engineers, so forth and so on, and that's going to be, for example, from the offsite, after completion of project, the engineer must submit a letter certifying project was completed according to plans. So I know we do inspections on these things. Is that how we can confirm that this thing was completed according to the plans that were submitted to the parish?
Yes and no. Again, you're looking at, for the inspection, you look at physically what was put there. But all of the data that was initiated by the engineers, you know, to design, for the design of that subdivision or development, when they stamp it, they're saying our data, our calculations is correct. And, you know, we're holding them to that after the development is finished. So it's a little bit different between inspection and them, I guess, holding us harmless of anything that comes about afterward due to some miscalculations on their part.
And that's part of where I'm trying to get with as well. I mean, you're aware of an issue we're dealing with in my area that somewhere down the line, either the developer didn't catch it or we didn't catch it, and so now we got water draining in an area or we didn't calculate for enough drainage. How do we know that the plans that they're bringing to us are appropriate and are going to handle that particular development in that area?
For the most part, we have to depend on the calculations of their design engineer. We review the basic, I guess, the results of their calculations and determine that based on if their calculations is true, what they're doing is correct. In other words, if they're saying that 20 cubic feet per second of off-site water is coming to that subdivision, we're not going to go out and recalculate that 20 cubic feet per second. But we're saying that if that is coming into a subdivision, that this size pipe or this size catch basin is adequate to accommodate that flow. Now, they have to, when they stamp that plans, they're saying that that is an accurate figure. 20 feet per second, cubic feet per second is accurate. Again, that's something we don't have time to go back and redo their complete drainage analysis.
Well, so all that being said, what happens when they're wrong?
As it stands right now, we feel that it should be in an ordinance that the engineer that stamped that, if he's proven wrong, that he should be liable for it, or the developer who hired that engineer. Now, I don't know, and hopefully, some of this language that was put in there holds them to that.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Billy may want to address that point. I see him back there.
Billy?
Billy Aguilard, 15482 Allen Highway, Prairieville. Mr. Johnson, we put a statement in there that Mr. O'Neill agreed to it, and it says that the engineer is responsible for the underlying data in that drainage report, which makes them, if they stamp it, they're liable for it anyway. But this makes them a little bit more liable for the underlying data because they came up with the data in the report. So if something's wrong with it, it makes it easier for the parish to sue the engineer to make sure that the data was correct or to fix whatever the problem is.
Okay.
But it is, and I don't have a copy of it, but the statement is in,
Yeah.
it's in there somewhere. It's in the yellow somewhere.
It's in here.
Yeah. Okay. So, one of the other things that I had an issue or concern about in here, it mentions excess storage credits. And keeping some kind of a bank of that. First off, how do we go about deriving excess credits, and how do we, what I'm not what I want to make sure I understand about this, if I got, and I don't know if this is the way it works or not, and that's why I want to ask the question. But let's say there's a developer goes and develops a subdivision in Terry's district, and then he comes into my district to develop it, but he's got excess credits from that subdivision over there. How can he apply it in my district, or can they? Or do they have to be adjoining to one another? How does that work?
It's got to be, Mr. Johnson, again, it's got to be in the same watershed area. If they're going all the way from somebody else's district to yours, it may not work. But if it's in the same watershed area, then they can use it in that same watershed area. And the difference in elevations in the properties have to be within a foot of each other for them to be able to use it. If not, they just can't use it.
So, how far apart potentially could that be? I mean, can I have them a mile apart in the same watershed? And how can
It
that
could
benefit?
potentially
You know
be
what
in
I'm
the same-
saying? Just from my perspective, it doesn't, if I got subdivision within close proximity, I could see how one drainage could affect the other one or help the other one, but they're a half a mile apart. You know what I'm saying?
I don't have a copy of all the watersheds in the parish. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah.
Well, that's my whole thing. If I got somebody up on the northern end of the parish that's in I forget the name of the watershed, but 5 miles downstream, you know, my credits are collected in the upper one because it's higher in elevation. I dig it, and you know.
If I may, Ben.
Sure.
Derek Murphy. With that comes the base flood elevations on major waterways. You know, they vary as far as you go down. They decrease as you go downstream. Normally, the bank, I think this is what it says, was 1 foot on the base flood elevation within that area. It is a very precise criteria. In some areas, that might be 100 feet. In some areas, it might be a little long, depending on the watershed that it's part of. We can't jump watersheds. You can't go the northern end of the watershed versus the southern end. It's a 1 foot base flood elevation. In other areas, it's 2 feet, or in other parishes and other areas. In this case, we decided 1 foot due to the fact that in some instances, that 1 foot lasts a little long. It's basically watershed by watershed. It also has to be hydraulically equivalent and things like that. So this is in an area that might have issues getting the proper mitigation, things like that. It expands that area. Also leads into working with Bill if there's some channels that need improvement, and I think we had looked at some of that at one time, in order to allow mitigation to be done close by in order to make sure that the channels have capacity and things like that, if it's a part of Bill Nim's plan. So that's another reason for that, to have it around there, in order to make sure that you do have flood storage capabilities.
Okay.
I can tell you, on part of the administration and our staff, is when you get into areas like this, it's one of the reasons it causes a delay in reviews of all these plans. It's getting a little bit too complicated. From the standpoint of our staff, it's better that we don't have all of these exceptions to the rule. It's basically, if you do a better job on your subdivision, basically, great. The parish comes out to advantage. But you have to do at least an equal, runoff or solving the problems of your subdivision. I don't agree with the mitigation. I like the point of us being able to off-site mitigate. I like the point of coming to the drainage board and negotiating. If you can't do one thing, can you do something else that benefits the parish? But again, you're getting into an area there of a lot of gray areas. And that's one of the reasons we have a delay in okaying these drainage plans, because you get into these all kind of, conditions and negotiations and everything else. Preferably, I'd rather see it on the site, period. Mitigate on site. If you come out doing a better job at detaining the water or whatever, that's great. But to go with credits downstream and everything else, you get into a lot of problems.
I'm curious, Mr. Rue, I do business in a number of parishes and everything, and they do this in other parishes. And it's not that big a deal. You have a credit on so much, you have a written down and stamped amount of water that you are mitigating, and you got credit, you can credit for it, and you can, you got that much storage in the same watershed, so it has the same effect. And I think it's something that we're gonna see on these businesses. It's gonna be more prevalent in the commercial, that we see all of these quarter-acre, half-acre lots for commercial that we can't get mitigation for. And if we started to do some of this credits for mitigation, we can actually add some of these up and start getting those mitigated that we're not getting right now. And so I think down the line, we've got to, we need to start thinking about this process, because it is reasonable to start. And there's going to be some places in this parish where we can have storage areas that's more conducive to storage, and people can buy from that storage area instead of building a retention pond that might not be as in an area that is conducive to just using it or paying the money for a group of them to have. I mean, which is done in other places. And it can be figured out with engineering. I don't see.
It can be figured out, and again, the only thing I'm saying is that it just muddies the waters a hell of a lot more. And you said more you got to review, and more areas that you got to rely on the developer's engineer to give you the right information, and then our engineering review person has to go through that, and they come to, again, from my standpoint, keep it simple. Keep it simple as possible. We can expedite a lot of these permits and get through the review process a lot easier. Again, you can engineer just about anything, but we're having a problem with the time that's needed to go through all these reviews of developments because of all of these areas.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'm good. You can get to me next.
Okay. One issue, maybe two, on this excess credit business, I too have a little bid of angst about it. Bill, I hear you said you were kind of happy with all the language, but you are saying you'd be more happy if, you'd rather see mitigation right at the site as opposed to these excess credits going elsewhere. I guess a basic question to me is, are we just being a nice guy here? Why do we want to, the big issue would be to be sure you have enough mitigation going on for the site where you're at.
That's right.
And to apply it elsewhere, just, I don't see a need. I mean, do we need this language? I know you said you're happy with everything. Would you be unhappy if the excess storage credits on the part, my glasses, V goes away?
I would rather we keep it as simple as possible. I don't see the need. You can, and when a development, especially a commercial development with a lot of parking area and everything else, say, hey, look, I can't get a lot of mitigation. It can take away from my parking. Can I mitigate this downstream? That's really bull. There's a lot of ways of storage, of mitigating within your site, underneath the parking. They just don't want to spend the money to engineer something like that. It's gonna cost a good bit of money to do subsurface storage and stuff like this. And there are ways of doing it on site, but it costs a lot of money. The easy route is to say, can I do it downstream instead of on my site so I can keep my facility, my parking or whatever. So I would like to keep it simple, say mitigate on site.
See, it's sort of, analogous to me like impact fees. We always hear that if we go with this eventually, and I do hope we do one day, that the money needs to be used in the impacted area, not elsewhere. And this sort of seems to be the issue here with drainage to me, in its purest sense. We need to be sure we're taking care of business in this area. I'm not sure why we're going to give the credits elsewhere, even if there's precedent in other parishes to do that. Are we trying to just make the developers happy? I have a little problem. The other thing was this, we used the word earlier, liable. In Councilman Johnson's first question, I wrote, how is that so? Would Ascension Parish have to actually sue? I think I heard that, the developer and or his engineer, if the engineer's calculations are wrong? Because we don't have any, it comes to us, we accept it. You said it's going to be stamped and certified, and that all makes it good, but I think, I'm not trying to put words in Benny's mouth, people make mistakes.
And I don't know how
I'm
to
not
answer
interested,
that.
frankly, in going to court. I don't know if Mr. Martinez is either.
But you have the issue too of the bottom, the way we've been handling it before in treating that situation. If we get a situation where, say a miscalculation, it caused a house to flood like we had recently, we basically say, look, it's a private issue, legal issue between the harmed party and whoever he figures harmed him. You get your lawyer, you sue. And now, to bring the parish into the middle of it is a whole different issue. And is that even right? If one person sues and, has a problem, then all of a sudden they run to the parish and say, I want you to take this battle up for me. It gets us into a situation that I don't think we want to be in.
So what does Mr. Parrington say about this?
I don't know if he's, O'Neill, I don't know if he put that statement in there, but it don't really clarify who is the party that would bring the lawsuit,
Say something again?
Yes, Mr. Murphy?
Derek Murphy again. Barring this 3 foot, barring the mitigation, barring everything else, anytime an engineer, drainage, sewer, roads, this parish hires engineers all the time. Those engineers are protected by E&O insurance, errors and omissions insurance, the same insurance that is for all engineers must have, liability insurance, things like that. No one is perfect, and no one is saying that. But when you can't just look at just this and say, oh, what if the engineers make a wrong calculation here? What if we make a wrong calculation on the road? What if we do this? What if a building footing is miscalculated? What if, there's a lot of what ifs. But the engineers aren't just designing this drainage below the 3 foot. We have ordinances in place, both state, federal, and local ordinances that control. We also have organizations and laws and rules and compendiums that control us as engineers, as a profession. So when you look at who is going to come after, but you got to look at everything. You got to look at the engineers that the parish themselves hire, who in this case would be if they were developing something such as any project that y'all would have in y'all book. So just keep that in mind also as y'all just looking at just this rule itself.
It doesn't matter what we do, we have the same.
One of the things that it always irked me a little bit is the fact when we get into these, developments and engineering studies and everything else, we're taking the minimum requirements, i.e. a 10-year design, where to go with 10-year design down the line. Any other agency, you go with safety on anything, it's 2 or 3 times what it actually is. Okay, just make sure that it doesn't happen. Let's go 3 times. You go with ropes or ladders or whatever. If say it's rated 300, it probably holds 600, okay? But it's rated for 300 pounds. Again, but we're getting into this type of stuff. 10 years, 10 year, and they try to hit that 10 year, no more than 10 year, because it costs money. And that's the fact that if you did have I guess, you know, you did, say, in other words, go with 25 on everything, or 50 on everything, you know, even if you miscalculate and everything, you can be well under something that normally would hurt you. But again, this is something that's a whole different issue. But going back to this data and looking at it, engineering and suing, if you had more protection, then you wouldn't have the problems. I mean, that's what we see from the drainage.
This is almost exactly what you're saying, is almost exactly what President Obama had proposed in his thing, to go 2 feet above, is to go to the 100-year and thing, to have everybody, and everybody's going up there now and trying to fight that, because it would take many areas of this parish out of commerce. You couldn't build a house, not a single house in Sanamo area or in downtown Panama and some other areas too. So we've got to decide whether we're going to be reasonable with people that are coming in here to do business or buying a house, or how much do we want to pay for a house? Do we want to pay $200,000 for a house or $500,000 for a house? Because we can price them out. And when we say that it's only because of the cost, everything is the cost in here. And whether we buy a Cadillac or a Chevrolet, it is cost. And so we do have to be conscious of that, of the cost of people, and be reasonable with that. So that's what we're sitting up here doing, because if not, we would just put everybody on 10-foot stilts and not have to worry about any flood anywhere. But the cost and the inconvenience and the idea of people taking their land out of commerce is a reasonable thing, and it's something that we have to be aware of. And so all of these things is the reason why we're having this discussion, and why there is some disagreements and discussions, in different viewpoints. Yes, Mr.
I'll disagree with you to a certain extent. I don't necessarily think, for example, the 36-inch rule and not allowing fill over that, which was the original point of topic with this, and these anthills that we originally go back to, I don't think we're taking property out of commerce. I think you may not be able to put a slab on it, but part of the problem, and I mean, you go look in New Orleans after Katrina, they built those levees up there, and they figure, well, we built the levees, we're protected, but as soon as the storm come through and the barge hit that levee, how many houses you had underwater? And not just a little bit of water. I mean, there's some areas of this parish that are low, and there's some areas of this parish that I'm not trying to take anybody's money from them or take their property away from them, not being able to develop them. But being reasonable about it, you can't go in there and put 10 foot of dirt over a couple hundred acres of property and say, oh, we're all good. We're above the base flood elevation. Everybody's happy, because then you change the profile of what the parish looks like. And so there's got to be a compromise in it. And I think that's what we're trying to get to here. But we've also got to understand that there may be some areas of the parish, like what we're talking about here, that it may not be a situation where you can build on that property, but it may be a land bank or something like what you're talking about as well. I don't know. I don't have all the answers to it, and it's one of the things we've been talking about for a long time, and that's why part of this came out, this ordinance is coming about like it is. But I don't feel comfortable in some of those instances where we can just automatically come up with a generic thing that says, as long as we follow this, there's not an area in the parish we can't develop. I think there has to be some situational stuff that we look at, and some guidance that we give the administration and our engineers and everybody and the developers to follow, that, we don't necessarily have to go in there and put closed-in ditches. We don't necessarily go in there and say that we're going to put in a road 2 feet above base flood elevation or a foot above base flood elevation in order to make sure that road's passable. It may be in certain times of flood conditions or whatever, that those roads are going to be underwater, and the people, when they buy in that area, are going to have to understand that road's going to be underwater, or your yard's going to have water in it for an excess period of time because of strictly where it's at. I don't know, but I mean, I like some of the stuff that's in here, but I think we need to proceed with caution, or go back and look and have the ability to come back and look and review of these things and have some stuff in here. I was just looking at number 4. on page 10, if after construction is determined through an on-site investigation by Parish drainage engineer that an adjacent property owner is experiencing an increase in off-site runoff due to construction, then the property owner will be required by the Ascension Parish Engineer Department to construct a swell sufficient in size as stated by the Parish drainage engineer to collect and convey the runoff away from the impacted property. I don't know if too many subdivisions will be able to do that after they're developed. I mean, some of the ones that I've dealt with, there is no way to do that after they're developed.
Well, they will have to be with this. That's what we
Well,
put in
then,
there to protect.
are we increasing the setbacks to provide for something like that in case this happens?
You have the contours and stuff. Billy, and you know more.
Mr. Johnson, the statement that you said, that is in the existing ordinance as it is today. Everything that's in the ordinance, that individual lot owners could put 3 foot of fill on their lots without any further. They could just go put 3 foot of fill on their lots and do whatever they wanted to. Commercial buildings could put 3 foot of fill on their lots and do whatever they wanted to. Then they could also, if they needed to build over 3 foot, they gave an exemption to do mitigated fill over it. The only person that didn't have that waiver was new subdivision. New subdivisions do drainage studies, and the whole engineered subdivision, if you look at it, none of them are putting any water on the neighbor's property. Not supposed to put water on the neighbor's property. That should be in their drainage review when the parish reviews the subdivision plans. This goes a little bit step further. If y'all wanted the sentence added in there that if your individual puts over 3 foot of fill or under 3 foot, if they do 3 foot of fill, they have to show a plan that shows where the existing contours, the future contours, where the water's gonna go, how they're gonna stop the water from running on the neighbor's property to flood it. And all that was added from the last time we had the discussions.
Well, back when we originally took this up, last year, I think it was, and I don't know where it got changed at, but my understanding with this was that you couldn't put up to 3 foot of fill. You could put up to 3 foot, but you had to mitigate it on your own property, individual lot owners. You couldn't go above 3 foot. Now, where it got changed at between there and here, I'm not sure.
Right. The original ordinance that it was 3 foot of fill, but they could do mitigated fill over 3 foot. That's what the ordinance says right now. There's an exemption there for that.
Right, that's what I'm saying, but before, I don't know where that got changed at, but I know what I was understanding, what I voted on to approve tonight, that the ordinance was changed, that they could do up to 3 foot, no more.
Right.
There was no mitigation after, you had to mitigate up to 3 foot. You
That
couldn't
may-
let water run off your property, you could build up to 3 foot, but you couldn't let water run off your property, you had to mitigate it, but after 3 foot, that was it. Because the problem came about, and I talked to several council members after this, came about, that our understanding of it was we were trying to address the problem with these anthills that were being created all over the parish, and it wasn't, that's where this whole thing got started at. So there were some changes after we got through with it, and we're trying to make the most of it here, and I appreciate you guys working with us to do something, but, let's go forward and see where it comes out at.
And I think you're right, that was the original intent, but that's not how the ordinance finally came out in this final finished version.
Right.
And the thing that it really discriminated against new subdivisions, because if we had one ditch we had to cross and it took 5 foot of fill across that one ditch, we couldn't develop a subdivision, and that's just not right.
The other, you got to realize now, you got to understand that we're talking about two different things.
That's
and
right.
sometimes the ordinance is kind of vague on it. You got the runoff from the subdivision, containment of the water, runoff from that footprint of the subdivision onto other properties. But you also got the floodplain management. You got the water coming onto that normally is stored on that property that is somewhat accounted for, but it's kind of vague on how they account for it, how it can get into their property. They are required to supply, not only to take care of the runoff from their property, but also to take the runoff that usually comes on that property from other sites. That is a problem in accounting for that water in some subdivisions. How they're gonna do that, and then we look at it, and it in a lot of cases, it harms, it eventually gets onto that property and stored, but it harms other people before it gets there. You can't beat up Mother Nature. If they had a perfect system of water storage, and that's your low-lying areas, and it stored the water. Once you start taking up your floodplains, even if you try to mitigate it and try to engineer it, it's not as good as Mother Nature, and you're never going to get it to the same point as with the way it was before when you had natural floodplain management provided by nature. And that's the problem we run in now. That we are accounting for the runoff, hard surface runoff, somewhat, but we've taken up too much water storage. And when you take up the storage, it's gonna go somewhere. And to provide an area for it to go is where we're having the problem.
Terry?
Just a couple of things. First off, right off the top of my head, I think that we passed a good ordinance in 2013 that protected the people who live here and protected the people who were that were gonna live here, in that they would not be buying a house that was built in a floodplain that might one day result in some serious flood insurance for them and or for their neighbors. And flood insurance, as a result of bigger waters, is a real challenge, and we have worked hard on that. So I have a concern surrounding that. I also have a concern that a homeowner with water in his house is not going to be impressed by the fact that somebody bought some storage a mile away, or half a mile away, or 5 miles away. So this is a non-starter for me if it's not mitigated on the site. I cannot support something that mitigates off-site. I'm willing to look at this and even vote in favor of it if it mitigates on-site. If the other questions that I have are answered, and the most important one being, didn't we have a very logical discussion in 2013 about the dangers of building in a flood zone, and that we would not be taking property out of commerce? There are ways to build in a flood zone that are safe for both the property owner, surrounding property owners, and those people who are moving into that community. So unless I missed something in 2013, I'm not convinced why we're going back to review this. I understand that there were a few things that could have been tweaked, and I'm certainly happy to look at that, but I think our citizens need to be very concerned at this walk back on this. I'm concerned about it myself.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Well, and look, with these modifications that we have here, it's definitely better than what we have on the books right now. I'm in support of these changes. Look, when we have these events, I mean, I'm sorry, we're not gonna be able to save everyone. We're gonna be able to do the best we can do. But, what we have, what proposed here now, I feel better than what we have on the books now. And I'm gonna support, the proposed modifications on this, and I'll make that in the form of a motion.
Got a motion by Mr. Lambert to move forward with this compromise on the developments.
I'm going to second that, Mr. Chairman.
A second by Mr. Satterley.
Discussion.
Any other discussion? With that-
Question.
with-
Does this, what we are proposing to vote upon now, mitigate on-site or off-site?
Both.
It does both.
Only,
It allows for off-site,
Allows for credits to be used in another area.
which is something this parish has talked up. Mr. Aguilar, if you want to I know you've been, yes, sir, you want to address that issue, because we want to make sure that we get it all right.
I really don't want to address the on or off-site mitigation, but just to say that it's almost, and I'm not saying you can't do it, because you can, but on small commercial projects, they need to have the ability to do off-site mitigation. And it's done in every parish around here, and all,
Correct me
and I
if
don't
I'm
care what
wrong,
they
that's
do.
not what we're voting on right now. This is subdivision stuff.
No,
I
it's
mean,
not
that's-
just, it's for individual lot owners under a half acre, individual lots over a half acre, commercial projects, and subdivisions. All that's covered in this ordinance.
So can we mitigate off-site? I'm not uncomfortable with off-site mitigation for commercial, but I am uncomfortable with off-site, well, I don't know, I take that back, I think I am. Because I don't want to see a parking lot, as Bill described, being mitigated 5 miles down the road, and the water's running off where the parking lot is.
Well, and I agree with you. I don't think 5 miles down the road is really a logical thing. I don't think the watersheds are that big that's gonna be 5 miles down the road. But the one thing that I really wanted to say here too was that we've agreed with Mr. Rue to do a 25-year storm retention in subdivisions with some certain criteria involved. If it's in the downstream part of the watershed, we want to dump the water into the main watershed area, the main streams, quick. We don't want to do retention. We want to get rid of that water before the upstream water gets there. And we've agreed to talk to Mr. Bill and work out a proposal to get to that. So instead of 10-year storms, we're going to do 25-year storms in all new subdivisions. So we're going to be retaining more water in the upstream watershed than we are now with a 25-year storm. So that's another part of this thing that's not in this revision yet, but that's coming later.
But we're voting on this revision.
This is.
So
So I
my
just want
concern.
to say that we're going to do the
Yeah, and
25-year storm for
I
retention.
appreciate that, and I think that would make a lot of people feel a whole lot better about this if we were looking at a 25-year storm.
What we have
That's
right,
not what's in this document.
what we have right now is we're using 25 for the water that's flowing through the subdivision. And what's that?
It's not
Oh,
in.
we didn't get to
I
that
think
yet?
it's 10.
'Cause
Am I right?
Well,
what I was hearing.
the Drainage Department, EAD is requiring
You are
25.
requiring it.
It's requiring it on subdivision, it's not part of the ordinance, but
Right.
we are requiring it. And I have to agree that as it stands, the changes in the language that was put into what you're voting on right now it's a better document than it was before, if you make these changes. It clarifies some issues and clarifies some language. I don't think that should be end of the story. I think we should still talk about other improvements to the drainage ordinance. What you're going to vote on tonight is not hurting anything. It helps understand the present drainage ordinance, but there are more improvements needed to the ordinance.
And we'd like to continue to improve and continue to address these things, but we try to do it, parts at a time. So this is not going to stop right here.
So correct me, please, because y'all know I'm ignorant on drainage matters. Is what we are working on right now, is it possible for these issues to be mitigated on the site? And should they be?
It should
What I'm
be-
hearing is that they should.
It should be, and we have held the view before, the policy is, and a lot of people, developers and everything is against it, and some legal people, but it should remain in there, the discretion of the drainage district to okay any and all parts of the drainage ordinance when it comes to impact studies and everything else. If they want credits, it's our discretion to say, yeah, it can't benefit us, we do it at this location here, period. Or at that location, yes, we'll get more benefit by mitigating or using some credits down here and do an area retention. But we have to have the ability, number one, not to have it set in stone so the developers come back to it and say, you got to allow us to do it. It got to be purely the discretion of the drainage district to make that determination and to okay it or deny it.
The only thing that scares me about that bill is discretion allows for favoritism. And I think people have an inherent distrust of us, and that disappoints me beyond words. So I do not want anything that gives discretion that might be viewed by the citizens of my district as giving favoritism to any developer over another developer, or, I just think that's dangerous, while I understand it. And I go back to my original contention. I do not believe that the guy that you build a subdivision on 73 and it floods a house next door to them that's been there for 50 years, and I go over there and try to explain to him that I'm very sorry he's got a foot of water in his house, but these people bought some storage down the road. I don't think they buy that. I think we have a responsibility to be more careful in what we do for the citizens who live here now. And I have some serious concerns for those we bring in and who are trusting that their houses are not going to flood. or that the next subdivision next to them won't dump water on top of them. I mean, this is a serious situation.
Well, that's why we said in the beginning that we need to keep it simple. We're not for all these exceptions. But if you are going to have the exceptions, you've got to have somebody in charge to say yea or nay, and not something in there ironclad to say, you have to let us do it, you know. And until you take all of the exceptions out, as long as we're in there with an overview of what's happening with final determination or approval, then we can hold the line until other changes are made.
Okay?
At least that's what we try to do.
Okay. Yes.
Certain instances, and I'm gonna just take Dempsey's area for one. There's a subdivision going up there now by Bill Morgan Road, okay? If you go right by there, there's a lot of dirt. It looks like an airstrip coming up, okay? So the water, when the river's gonna flood, that water usually goes straight through there and goes out. Now, that water's now gonna have to go here, go toward Bill Morgan Road, go to John Ely Road. So, you know, in some instances, it just would be common sense that this, if you look at it, I don't know if we go far enough, and I think that's the main problem in our ordinance. I don't think we go far enough when we look and require a drainage study that we can really see the effects downstream. I mean, in Benny's instance, that one house that we're looking at now, and I think we've got a sort of a solution. Right. But when that subdivision was built, that house is actually built in the collection area. Okay, so it's none of the other houses flood, but that house is 3 or 4 inches below the rest of the slabs. So when it rains, it's going to get 2 inches of water in it every time, and that's basically what happened. So even though you dig a retention pond, if it's not in the right area, it still doesn't matter. I mean, once that pond gets full and the Amite River overflows, I mean, we got to know how that water gets there first to get it out. So, again, I think there's a lot that still needs to be looked at in this ordinance. I mean, what we're doing is taking a piece at a time and trying to tweak it, I think. But there's still going to be problems. And, you know, if you can build in wetlands. I mean, that's not a problem. If the Corps, when you call the Corps, they say, well, it's not our problem, it's whatever the parish allows, okay? So you make the rules on that. And as far as taking property out of commerce, I mean, it's been a long-standing fight and something that I worked with back when Billy Tozan was in, that, you know, the federal government takes your property, says it, declares it wetlands, and then if you got 3 acres and you want to build a house, and you got to go mitigate 2 acres, you got to spend $100,000 to build a house on your own land. So, I mean, by us doing what we're doing, I don't think it's I mean, we still want you to build, but we want to make sure that in the future that you still have enough ground that's open and flood basin that's open to retain the water after you build a subdivision or you build any kind of building. So we got to look at this thing and take it piece by piece and hopefully can come up with a compromise that works for everybody.
We're going to put the drainage studies on the agenda along with the other things you want to, start next month, on those things to tweak it and work this in. So all of these things that we are talking about here, we're going to start working on that as we work it into this ordinance.
Put discussion on there also, Ken, about modeling.
Okay.
I think modeling would help out a lot.
Those are the type of things that run into problems, those are the type of things that we need to look at down the line to improve upon. So we'll make sure that we don't have those instances that happen that we talked about.
Yeah, if I may, it's, you know, all our safely built upon land, great percentage of it is done for. It's built upon. So now what we're looking at is building in places that maybe God didn't intend there to be a house. And, you know, I don't know how we deal with that. We need to be extremely cautious. I am pro-development, but I'm going to repeat myself, there's more than one way to build a house in a flood zone. And there is a safe way to do it, and then there is a way that dumps water on your neighbors. And if that can't be handled, you know, it's going to be hard for me to support on behalf of the people I represent that we walk back from where we went last year.
All right, we have,
And I just want to make one other comment, and that is the fact that we have to continue with oversight by the drainage districts, because you can have all the educated people in the world, it doesn't take the place of experienced people. When it comes to EAD and West District drainage, it's not viewed from a technical standpoint per se, it's from a person that's experienced with what's happening in that area. And a lot of times we catch things that the data don't show, and we got to continue with oversight.
okay. Mr. Chairman, we will acquiesce since you,
Just a quick note, I think most of y'all know how I feel about this. This basic class discussion started, like Ms. Castle said, several years back. And the main thing that was beating us up then, and I know, Kent, that just came up 3 terms ago before I got here anyway, is the anthills or whatever you want to call them. We have people that have a lot that are building to our elevation to put a concrete slab. And within doing so, in the size of the house that they're putting, puts their slope to the edge of their property line, and they have no responsibility whatsoever for a drop of water. They don't even have a little swale ditch or anything next to them, okay? So that's right on their neighbor. And that's in a lot of low areas, okay? I mean, to the point of 5 to 6 feet high, okay? So one of the things we wanted to address within this elevation was to try to put some kind of max on it. And I know it's been a hard discussion and a hard argument over the years. And I appreciate y'all, this committee, working through, and it'll get to the full council at some point. I agree with Bill to the point of leaving some discretion to where we can work with people. But I'm going to tell you, Benny's is a perfect example. I have one piece of land within my district right now that somebody wants to put a subdivision, or they want to sell it for somebody else who wants to put a subdivision, that is a big drainage swale, okay? And I don't know any real great way to do that subdivision in the way that subdivisions are built now with concrete slabs, you know, and make it all work, right? And, you know, the mitigation is just one of the issues, but it don't stop the water that used to flow through there. So I'd ask that y'all continue some deliberation and get some more clarity to where you want to go forward with it. I appreciate it.
okay, we have a motion and a second to move this to the council. Any opposition?
This is a motion to move it to the council, or explain to
move
me
this-
what's, we're
to
going to have,
move this to the
we're going to have
council.
another discussion at the council level.
Yes, it's gonna be as,
It's a recommendation.
it's gonna be,
Okay.
it's gonna come to the council for discussion, as an ordinance, open as an introduction, and then, and advertise, and then 2 weeks later, we'll have the discussion and vote upon it, or amend it, or whatever. So, any opposition? No opposition, this motion passed, to send to the council. Jessica, put it on the next, council agenda, that's available. And then with that, we have some other items that are going to be time-consuming, and since we're getting behind on the, this agenda for the meetings, I would like to recommend that we postpone the 5 and 6 until the next meeting.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
A motion and a second for that, no opposition. And we move to number 7.
Motion adjourned.
Motion and a second to adjourn. This meeting is hereby adjourned.